to you. So thanks, Marty. It's always a pleasure to do a panel for IvyFON, and just sitting in, it's just remarkable some of the strategies that you hear from the investors, as well as the science and the different things we get to learn. I always appreciate the panels and the speakers. Tom, thanks so much for your presentation. We'll go through some introductions, but I like the last comment, or one of the last comments you said was just an aspect to change the world. And I think in some ways we're all trying to do that a little bit at a time. Reminds me of how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. And I think in healthcare, we have a lot of that going on. But it seems to have been accelerated here in the last few years, thanks to COVID. And we'll chat more about that. But first, let's start with some introductions. John, glad to have you on the panel. Would you just introduce yourself, sir?
Well, thank you, Al, and thank you very much, you and Marty, for having me. Much appreciated, and great panel to be part of. So I am CEO and co-founder of Stingray Therapeutics, which is an immune oncology company. Immune oncology has been fantastic for patients and gotten a great start, but it has kind of stymied just a bit because we're only working in one arm of immunity. And when cancer shuts off the other arm, none of our current immune oncology therapies work. So many of us, and certainly Stingray, is working very hard on actually empowering that second arm of immunity and allowing immune oncology to work broadly across the board. My background is I'm a business guy, Wharton MBA. I started at Eli Lilly and worked for them 28 years, sales and marketing, and then corporate business development, buying programs very much like Stingray. And Stingray is a therapeutics company, and we are working to be bought by a pharma company. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Javier.
Olivier, I guess.
Yes, but
Olivier Jarry. I'm mostly a pharma person, biopharma. I've been 15 years with Novartis, Bayer, Bristol Myers Squibb, M&A, strategy, and region head or division head. The last 12 years, I've been more with smaller companies. I've been president of a company in Israel, CEO of a neurology company in the UK. I'm currently part-time CEO of an oncology company in Spain and CFO of a vaccines company in the US. And we can speak of any one of them. And I'm also a FINRA license, so I do a bit of investment with my bank.
Thank you, sir. And Tom, since you just went, perhaps a brief introduction.
Yeah, just quickly, I've run several mid-sized pharmaceutical companies, public companies. I've been a general partner in 2 funds. One I started in China, in Shanghai, and but mostly I've started 11 companies. In first 3 were in artificial intelligence, and most of the remainders were in life sciences. And I've had 5 multi-billion-dollar exits from those 11.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm Al Dampier. I'm the managing partner at Dampier Consulting Group. And like many, I started in life sciences, left when I was with a Fortune 10 company up in the New Jersey, New York area. So you can figure that out real quickly, but left when I would not move to Florence, Italy, when I was in international business development, although it sounded nice. And since then, I've had 4 or 5 startups, one I don't really count right now in genomics. And a few years ago, we recognized how important talent was to VC and private equity, and we moved into the talent space because we needed talent as well with one of the companies. So that's my background, and let's kick it off with starting with some trends in healthcare. John, what do you see for some of the trends that you've been tracking in healthcare?
Well, I think this is a really interesting time to be considering investing in healthcare because as the group has talked about, last year was a very strong year for healthcare. Everything looked great. Valuations were very high. The first quarter of this year has been a major reversal in that. Private biotech companies' valuations have fallen fairly dramatically. There have been a couple misses in the, public valuations, a couple of misses in the public markets, which have also hurt. And valuations are quite a bit more reasonable now. So as we look to the things that will really make a difference, I think investing in healthcare could be quite strong at this point in time. You could get in low. And the nice thing about healthcare is it's pretty recession resistant because people always need to be healthy. That doesn't change with your economic circumstances. And there are always big opportunities. And the science is incredible today. The things that are getting solved and the diseases that are coming to light, it's just really amazing.
Thanks, John. And Javier, you have an interesting background in an interesting company working at vaccines. Of course, vaccines have been at the forefront with change in the last 2 years. Any comments to add to John's comments?
Yeah, in general, I mean, the first thing is healthcare is a huge domain, and it's always useful to segment it. If we speak of providers, for example, and I guess there is a number of people on the audience interested in whatever, cosmetic surgery, dental surgery, outpatients. I mean, this is a complete segment that has suffered a lot actually from COVID because the focus was so much on COVID. But there's probably a resurgence to come out of it, consolidation, and a number of things interesting I cannot really speak of. But we see a lot of activity and a lot of change of mind because there has been a lot of adaptation needed for the last 2 years. Another segment is payers, especially in the US. I will exclude this one. It's many big companies and they have their own dynamics, and it's relatively rigid, I would say. But the last piece, which is really what we could call life sciences, is in my view the most exciting for big companies and even much more for smaller companies. Having been being pharma, we know that the innovation comes from the small company. You just buy them when time is appropriate. And even in this segment, you have the biotech part, which has its own dynamics, which is quite a binary. We heard earlier today, I'm not invested when something is not approved by the FDA. Yeah, we save a lot of mice, as we also said. And then is it working in humans is the next point, and is going to be approvable by FDA, EMA, and others is also a high level of risk, but a high level of interest, and usually a personal interest for many family offices. If I connect to vaccines, we are in herpes vaccines with rational vaccines. Herpes type 1 is in about 70% of people in the world. So just count ourselves around the room, and it manifests with cold sores or nothing, or a lot of pain in nerves or neurodegeneration. So it's actually a grave disease which may have 6 billion people infected. We don't know the exact number around the world. So we have actually a number of investors that say, that's really interesting. I would have a personal interest, or I know somebody in my family that could benefit one day. That there is just a lot of people waiting for this kind of products. And then there are the segments of medtech, which is more devices used by surgeons and so on, which has its own dynamics we can speak of. And what I would call health tech, and I would put the previous presentation by Thomas in this, which is all technology, software, hardware that are actually supporting all the others, supporting pharma discovery, supporting the surgery room, a lot of diversity and a lot of very good things that are helping healthcare in general.
Yes, I agree. There's a lot of transformation in digital health as well, and still, in my view, a lot of unmet needs. And certainly, Tom, you've recognized a lot of those unmet needs and opportunities to change the world. Even we were hearing about Africa earlier today. What do you see as some of the unmet needs in whether it's the providers, the payers? We haven't talked yet about telehealth and some of the changes going on there. There's in digital health, there's a lot of things going on in digital health, and we hear a lot about that in here in Austin. I know AI is being used in R&D now, so there's so many different ways to go from an investment perspective. Lead me down this road a little bit. Where should I look if you or me?
So, Al, you mentioned a couple of areas that are actually, I think, really fruitful. So telehealth is an area where you can have extraordinary rates of return with very low cost. And COVID-19 has accelerated the use of remote and various technologies. But I think that's an area that's still early in the curve. I'm particularly enamored with cell engineering and modifying the cell. And so CRISPR technology is incredible because it allows you to basically edit the genome of a cell, and it's easy to do. And so we have seen rapid, I visit probably several hundred labs a year, and almost all of them are using it and in various ways to build better models, to build better therapeutics. And there's more of so that leads me to picks and shovels. I like picks and shovels. I ran a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. I don't want to go through again the waiting for data to be unblinded. It's terrible for one's health and psyche. And so I like technologies that help all the others, and you sell to all of them, and you're less really kind of insulated from the regulatory pathway. So that's basically a lot of research type of tools.
If I may make a comment on digital health, I've been around. I've been 4 years supporting Dampier Health, which is a digital therapeutic, and I'm still around this segment. It's extremely diverse. You have digital health helping the patient, helping the physician, helping physician and patient communicate, helping patient to select their payers, helping pharma to communicate to physicians. I mean, it's a lot of different pieces. When we take a step back and try to evaluate these companies, and this is true also for biotech and medtech, we come back to a triple aim all the time. And for you not maybe familiar with triple aim from IHI, essentially is, does this company create demonstrable medical outcomes? What do they have in terms of studies? How does the patient really improve, and so on? Number two is cost reduction, which in many cases needs you to collaborate with an Intermountain or Geisinger and do studies together. And number three and four, some people call it quadruple aim, is the patient experience and or the physician experience, which in surgery is often both of them together. And every company we look at this triple, quadruple aim, and we say, how well do they demonstrate they make a change? And digital health has been behind for a while. I've been supporting companies that say, what do you need data? I say, if you don't have data, don't have evidence, you're not going to sell. And for people that are sometimes tech enamored, it's not obvious, but once they see the power of evidence, it becomes obvious. So for any investor, I would say, look at this triple aim in the investments you want to make. That's essential.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a question here.
Yeah, I was curious if you jump and help me unbundle something for me. When I think about opportunities in healthcare, I think about the industry. There's a sense that there is an internal venture or internal funds of all the big farmers, big bios and whatnot, and there's kind of an external venture capital fund going into that. And I'm just curious, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just curious, what is the mix of the flow to the vaccines, the science, the bio, versus what you will do, Tom, the picks and shovels? If you had to say for every dollar going into the industry, 70% or 80% going here, 20%, give me a sense of magnitude, guys. Does that make sense?
So I've been, Olivier made a good point. There's many different segments, and they're very, very different. So there's therapeutics, devices, diagnostics, and research tools. And because I have raised hundreds of millions in all of those except research tools, I wrongly assumed it was going to be easy to raise money in research tools. Interestingly, it is a underinvested area. It's a little bit smaller than the others, and so it's a little bit harder to put large amounts of money to work. So it amazes me if you look at the returns. Research tools sell to everyone. It's less risk. Their returns are like number 2 to biotech, better than pharma, better than devices. And
there's no FDA one?
No FDA risk. So that's critical. That is really, really critical. If you can mitigate the risk, the regulatory risk, and even if you're investing in therapeutics, there's some ways to do that. There are, or any FDA approved, and it's really important to look at it. There may be data because it was used in, say, another indication. There may be data in other countries. There are platform companies, so you have not just one shot on goal, but interestingly, there's a swing back and forth among particularly venture investors on platform companies, and the reason is a good one, and it's something to think about when investing. It's the dichotomy between diversification with a platform and as JP Morgan, I believe, said, put all your eggs in one basket and watch it.
What's that? Yeah, sure.
So that is a difficult thing to do for any single investor.
Sure.
I actually think being at the extremes is important. So, investing in a company that it may be a pathway that could affect many drugs in oncology. We just heard an example where it could affect autoimmune diseases. It could affect cancer. In one direction, you want to increase the immune system. Another, you want to decrease it. So I personally find platforms, diversification is important, or the other extreme.
And are platforms internal or external to organizations? In other words, if you think about a think tank internally, it's big pharma, big bio versus an outside fund that's coming into the space. I mean, I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, so both like it. Both pharma, when they acquire a company, like that the fact that this drug could have multiple effects, or this type of drug, and certainly venture investors do as well, because it's so hard. I've developed drugs through phase 3. I was sure they were going to work. Everybody did. They probably did, but we weren't able, mostly for lack of data, to figure out what subpopulation. Mm-hmm. So I like both extremes, and so do most investors.
Tom, let me jump in right there. I agree with you, both extremes, because so many people want to see something tangible. And I've seen a lot of good money go after bad ideas in digital health recently. And I'm thinking of 50,000 that just went down the sink for somebody else. But then I've also seen some big public companies not get clinical approval in for their FDA approval in phase 3 studies. At the same time, research and these new clinical pathways, particularly in oncology, if you think of EERP, if you think of ATR1 inhibitors, WEE1 inhibitors, and some of these other things, and even what's going on in other rare diseases, I'm seeing more impact investing. And John, let me turn to you a little bit, because you're in that, you're in that stage where you're late seed, early A. You've got some great science. How do you counter it's not an app for me to use? Where would you say?
Well, I'm not very brilliant about how you make an app, so I don't know that I could take that question on directly, but I can talk a little bit about why therapeutics is exciting and why it can be a very high payday. And I do believe that platforms are very good, but platforms can be several different ways. You can either have a technology that can knock out several different kinds of drugs, or you can have a drug that can work in several different kinds of situations. I think what people are really looking for is they're looking for more than one shot on goal. Because if it's all just one shot on goal, then you're really taking a very high risk and you need a very high return. So I think that's something people think about. But the nice thing, talking about the whole spectrum, we've been all the way from the provider side down to biotech. My expertise is really in the biotech side. I've always been a molecule guy, a biotech or biologic guy. And there, I think the thing is that you have a tremendous technology in that you can impact people with a drug in ways that you just can't do nearly so well with medical procedure or with a device if you can find the right drug for that condition. And so as the technology enhances that ability, and all these different technologies that we have been talking about all enhance that ability to reduce the risk of trying to find the thing that will really solve the problem that you're after. And if you can elegantly solve that problem, you can do it at tremendous economics. It's like the difference between having an effective tuberculosis drug and putting somebody in an iron lung. It's a really different situation, and the economics are very, very strong. And, we all want to live as long as we can. And still, despite everything we do in medicine, mortality is 100%. And cancer is something that's very important because 1 out of 8 of us will get it in our lifetime. So it's a very, very big kind of condition. There are many others as well.
What about impact investing in mental health or substance abuse? Anyone have any experience there?
Let me say a word on impact investing, because actually we receive money from this kind of fund. So it connects to a question from a gentleman here just before, which is what kind of money do you receive at different stages? My experience with very, very early stage is go for grants. We have a number of small companies. They say, hey, you go to VC, I want to speak to 5 VC, 8 VC, whatever. Don't do that. I mean, they don't want to listen to you. The corporate VC don't want to listen to you. It's too early. Go for grants. And I've seen companies that have 5, 10, 15, 20 grants before they actually go to other types of funding. My small company in Spain were 100% grants until 2020. Right after the grants and before the VCs would be, well, you still have a value of 40, 50 million. They start to look at you. But in between are really family offices. And our experience with family offices is when they invest in some of these companies, it's personal. It's personal because they have somebody who has cancer, who has a genetic condition, and they don't necessarily go deep in the science, or they ask advice around, but they are extremely motivated by the impact that this can make in general for people like them. And it's a very emotional situation. I mean, we have people that have been close to killing themselves for some diseases and so on, and they say, I'm still alive, but I really need somebody who is going to find a drug for this. So I would say in life sciences, when you speak of family offices, it's very often impact investing.
John, what would you like to add to that?
Thank you. Great comments. We have impact investors in our company, and typically this can be a real win-win. And there are some family offices, there are some philanthropic foundations that do venture philanthropy. And a lot of times, if you have a product that works where their passion is, their particular cancer, whatever, in my situation, then that can be a win-win. And there are programs that you can take advantage of with the US and in Europe, where you can get some things that can be quite valuable by going first in an orphan disease or one that has poor treatment. So I think that's a real opportunity. And if a family office has a particular passion because their family has been impacted by a particular disease, there are absolutely some great collaborations that can happen from that.
Yeah, thanks, John.
If I may add, there is an entire segment of impact investing, which is emerging markets. And I wouldn't say names, but we've been in touch with 6 or 7 of these groups. They are looking, maybe it connects with the previous discussion about Africa, which is how can you find the next treatment for malaria that will be more efficient or will prevent resistance. You were speaking of tuberculosis. There is an entire ecosystem. I have a friend in Switzerland also doing this with Bamboo Capital Partners. They are looking for affordable diagnostics, affordable drugs that are going to help millions, if not billions of people.
Well, let me ask you another question. Aside from the NIH, which I think provides a lot of grants, what are other institutional or multicultural countries that have those NIH, type of grant-making entities? Or am I wrong to say that? Or
every rich country has them.
Yeah.
In India, speak of Japan and so on. In India, I never got anything. But in Germany and so on, yeah. So if I was mentioning grants in Spain, interestingly, we have grants from Europe, we have grants from the country of Spain, and we have grants from the region of Galicia, which is the region where we belong. So three levels of grants. Yes.
Okay.
Now the NIH is much richer and broader and everything. I mean, I can only praise them for the work they do. There is also the new initiative of ARPA Health that you certainly know about, which is, I'm not sure if it is the previous president here or the new president that started it, but it's the DARPA for health. Essentially, DARPA was for defense and ARPA Health is for health. And the idea is to put also billions behind.
Al, if I may mention something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you made an excellent point about family offices being mission driven. It is So what I've experienced, and it's not sour grapes because I have 7 angel groups, but angels have become more bureaucratic as they've become part of angel groups. So a lot of people who used to sit down with you and have a meal and then maybe visit your company and invest 100,000, 250,000, you'll hear often, well, I do all my investing through one of these angel groups. And the problem is that many of these groups have forgotten what they were, which is entrepreneurs, and they have a 6-month due diligence kind of a period, and they've actually become closer to VCs. And I, as I say, I have 7 angel groups, so I've experienced that. Family offices have filled in that gap that you were mentioning, that after grants, and the problem is it's really hard to find family offices, which is why I'm here, and getting some help from Marty. It is a matter of kind of networking. They don't often work together, so it's difficult to find them, but really invaluable. And it is a little bit more like the angels of past, where they know a lot about an area, they're motivated. I think 2 of you mentioned something that's important. So patient advocacy groups can be incredibly helpful to the investors and to those looking for investment. So they know a huge amount about the field. I've actually raised money from American Heart Association and a couple of other smaller ones. And a lot of them have actually ended up with royalties and a fair amount of cash themselves, but they can help you understand an investment. Oftentimes it amazes me, people are just afraid to pick up the phone and call somebody who's an expert in the field and ask for help. So investors can get a lot of help, and certainly those looking for funding. The patient advocacy groups have grown stronger and stronger, and are really can be major factors in development of diagnostics, devices, and cures related. So it's a good place to raise money, and it's also a great place to talk to other people about if you're thinking of investing.
That's a
not feeling that.
Go ahead. Somebody started to say something.
No, go ahead, Al.
I think that's a great point. In a plug for Marty here in IvyFON, it is nice to hear and meet some of these family offices, because I heard today of a couple of groups that were interested in life sciences, and I had no idea they were interested in life sciences, and that was from earlier in the day. So Marty, good work. I'm assuming you're still on here, but I know you've put together your app and you have lots of contacts across the country, and I'm sure there's going to be more about that coming in the near future. You mentioned outcomes. Outcomes can mean so much to so many different people. And I really want to go 2 areas with outcomes. One is just how we're using outcomes and the data. And then 2, how we're using data and technology, whether it's R&D, whether it's AI, whether it's for outcomes. I come from a health informatics background, so we were looking at longitudinal data in '97 before it was cool to look at longitudinal data. And, quite honestly, we still haven't done enough. So where do we go with technology in healthcare?
So let me jump quickly, because outcomes are especially interesting in digital health, digital therapeutics, when I was at Dario Health in particular. The good thing with digital health is you get tons of data. So Dario started with blood glucose measurements, BGM, and then moved to high blood pressure, then to depression, then to pain management and some other areas. But if you look at blood glucose measurement, for example, people have these connected devices, either they prick their fingers or they have a continuous glucose meter, but all the data is just flowing and coming. And once you look at the retrospective data analysis, 6 months later, 1 year later, all the data is there. It's not maybe terabytes, but it's a bunch of gigabytes that show you the patient is improving, blah, blah, blah. And when it's digital therapeutics and they interact with the app and they indicate what they eat, the exercise they do, if they travel or they get jet lagged or whatever, and they enter it into the app, you can analyze all of that. And you can find that, for example, in the case of Dario, they had people type 2 that were like just 1% A1C over the limit for diabetes. I think the number was 40% improve their A1C to the point that they are pre-diabetic, which is fantastic. They can stop using some drugs and these kind of things. So when I'm just speaking of this segment of digital therapeutics, but because you have so much data captured about the patient, you can actually have the outcomes directly out of the database.
Thank you. What about AI and digital outcomes, or especially in R&D? Don, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So that field is actually fairly nascent, and there have been a lot of real successes, and fairly early on. But it's really hardly done by big pharma. It's not really part of the usual progression of things that are done in developing a drug, but it's catching on very quickly. There's a conference actually next week, BioIT, which has just grown remarkably. I find actually conference attendance though is a reverse indicator, but they're not at the top. But when you see too many conferences and tons of people, it's probably too late. But there's very low cost compared to development of therapeutics, and I just haven't seen the kind of creativity yet that will occur in figuring out how to use data. So you've got a way to benefit from life sciences without needing $30-40 million just to get to maybe phase one. And again, I like picks and shovels in a sense. These companies can assist many, and it's a way it reduces costs. I think you made the point in medicine. You want it to be better. You want it to be less expensive, and there's no doubt data is critical there. One thing that's important is whether the FDA finds an area to be a priority, and they've lagged a little bit in this area, but starting about 2 years ago, they've been hiring in this area. They are asking more questions of every sponsor, drug developer, or diagnostic developer for more and more data. They're actually becoming very aware of reproducibility issues, and I think that is always a kind of a turning point. I mean, you do need regulators to care about something, and they're speaking at more of these conferences and requesting more data. So I think this is actually kind of a good area to invest in, and it doesn't take as much funding.
Quick question, Tom. Is there a regulatory arbitrage between the FDA and all the other regulators around the world in some of these cases? And there glitches, or there hiccups, or there places, maybe Olivier, you can talk about that, where you can get away with certain things.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that? Because we always get people who are saying, I'm doing testing in Europe, already approved, or
China.
we decided it was too difficult, so we're doing animal testing in Mexico, things like that.
Yeah, so it's the details matter here. So in general, there is increased harmonization of rules, regulations, greater acceptance, and some of that it's changing. So China has greatly increased its requirements and the kind of scientific basis for it, and a lot of FDA trained people are in the Sino equivalent. So there's less of an arbitrage, but where I think there's often the arbitrage is that there's still separate regulatory processes. And when I was on the pharmaceutical side, we like to license in drugs that were successful in Spain or some other country. Citicoline in Spain was well known and well used, and not known in the US. The US has sometimes an incredible capability of not looking around what's the world. So you have something with all of this data, great data, but the drug hasn't yet been brought to the United States. So there is definitely that kind of an arbitrage. And to answer Marty's question, it's more and more accepted. I know it's a little bit when you hear it, and it used to be, I'm doing the trial in some lesser developed country, and it was very suspect. But everybody's improved.
Well, one of the important things to note is, if a company is doing a study in another country, to get it through the FDA, it still has to meet U.S. standards. So whatever arbitrage you want to consider, we still have to go back to U.S. standards. John, you've done some animal studies recently, and I don't know if you've onshore them or offshore them. Do you want to add something here to this comment?
Well, let me talk about clinical studies first, then I can talk a little bit about that. But there are places that have certain advantages for certain drugs, as was said. So, for example, in Bangladesh, the percentage of people that have hepatitis B is enormous. So if you're studying in hepatitis B, you can go there, and there really is not a regulatory system. You kind of work with the major hospital and the major physicians, and there are things that you could do that you probably couldn't do in the US. And in that particular situation, that's a great opportunity. It used to be, I don't know what it's like today with the war, but it used to be you could study in a number of diseases in Russia in very interesting ways because the people didn't have access to certain therapies. And the reverse can also be true. For example, if you look at melanoma in the US, it's typical for people to get 3 or 4 expensive therapies today because there's some very good therapies for multiple myeloma. If you go to Australia, the general temperament of the government is going to be you can have one expensive therapy and everything else needs to be generic. So then your populations start to split. You're dealing with people that have been pre-treated by the time they get to you in very different ways. So it is important to understand all these things. There are a lot of differences in the world. Sometimes they work to your favor, sometimes against you. And obviously there was a lot of clinical work being done in Ukraine, and that's all blown up in people's faces if they were in the middle of that right now. So all these issues do apply. On animal work, there are certain things that we feel like the FDA is very sensitive to if you tend to do outside of the country. And so higher level animal toxicology can be an issue with the FDA sometimes if done outside the US. I'm not talking about if you do it in Canada or in Europe, but if you do it in India or you do it in China, it can be an issue. On the clinical side, there was a drug, the Lilly checkpoint inhibitor that was just turned down because all of the work was done in China, all of the phase 3 work. And the US FDA did not feel that that was significant enough racial disparity in the trial to be able to approve that drug. So all these issues do exist out there.
I agree with all the above, but there is a new element that really is major in the last 5 years, let's say, which is really ethnicity. So if you are testing a drug that is for a condition that is prevalent 70% with, let's say, African Americans, and you test it with 80% white people in the US, that doesn't work anymore. If you test it in India with 100% Indian people, it doesn't work anymore. So there is a lot of attention now of the regulatory authorities that your drug in Japan, in China, in India, in the US reflects the population that it's intended to treat.
Yeah, you couldn't test it in China. India, interestingly enough, was originally inhabited by people that boated over from Somalia. So it actually does have a pretty significant Black population. Interestingly, America, India, and Brazil are all pretty diverse and are all good places for that kind of diversity testing.
Thanks, Jess. Well, we've only got a few minutes left. And what I'd like to do in the last few minutes is really speak to the people out there that want to invest right now. What are the opportunities? We started off with this a little bit. We went around the horn a little bit. But if you were investing right now, or you're an investor on the sidelines, you'd want to get in healthcare or life science or even technology, where would you look first? What would you do?
Well, I can take a shot at that, Al, if you'd
Sure.
like.
Go ahead, John.
I really like the private space right now. Particularly in biotech and other opportunities. I really believe that we are through a lot of the worst of it in terms of the overall biotech devaluation, and I think it will start to come back. My favorite philosopher is Yoda, who said, the future very difficult to see. So you never know, but most people think that of course we will deal with this inflation for a number of years, but it will be, in the mid-single digits. It won't go crazy. And most people believe that a lot of the tightening has happened and been priced into securities. And so I think there's an opportunity. I think you want to look at high-tech places, and biotech tools in pharma are high-tech places. And I think other high-tech places, these are places that people are going to want these products. They're going to want to have them, and they're going to be willing to pay for them. And I think those are going to be the great places of the future.
Thanks, John. What would you like to add, Javier?
Yeah, so I made a short list actually, and obviously I would say invest in vaccines because I'm CFO of a vaccines company for herpes vaccines. But more broadly, I would say anti-infectives. And interestingly, infectious diseases were 80% 300 years ago of the death in the US and other places, and they come to like 5% of the expense now of this healthcare system until COVID. And we realize that now we can treat asthma, we can treat cardiovascular disease, but we don't treat well infectious diseases. So I think the pendulum is going to go back to infectious diseases. There are some predictions by the IMF, I think, that if there is a really big pandemic coming up at some point, 25% of global healthcare resources could just be going to it. And this was pre-COVID. I don't know what is the actual number for COVID, but and this takes many forms. It takes the form of prevention in the hospital in terms of antibacterial, antiviral, disinfection, UV, what you name it. There are many technologies plus obviously vaccines. Another very exciting to me is the microbiome. There is a lot of crap around it, but there are really good companies as well working on it and doing very good things. I'm a huge believer of monoclonal antibodies. For me, it's kind of a miracle product. I mean, it's so versatile against a variety of mechanisms in the body for inflammation, for cancer, for infectious diseases actually as well. I'm less excited about mRNA, and this is just a personal consideration, so don't take it as any investment advice, but mRNA is more like, in my view, a one-trick pony. Can do small things and do them okay, but as we see with the COVID vaccines, you need to have boosters and more boosters and so on. On the medtech side, I'm excited by robotics and surgery equipment, surgery navigation, because there is so much to do. It's a bit like Star Trek thing, but there is a long way to go to a Star Trek level. And diagnostics. Diagnostics have been underrated for the last 20 years, which is bad, but if you diagnose in the right time, you can save so many treatments and drugs afterwards. And everybody says it for 20 years. Diagnostics are still like, I don't know, 10% of the pharma expense, and should be much more. And that hopefully at some point it will happen. And then on health tech, everything which helps practitioners, everything that helps the labs, I would say for Farb, but everything that helps the doctors do a better job.
Thank you. Tom, your
thoughts. Can I step in now for a second and ask a question?
Sure.
Great. So, I'm looking at it from a macro point of view, which is that the trend in healthcare is that people aren't getting healthier.
Yeah.
And people are getting older.
And they're spending more money.
Yeah. And we've been talking about like wellness for 10 plus years. I mean, it was called something else 15 years ago. I forgot what it was called. But we've been talking about it for a long time. It's really not succeeding. I mean, if you had like a magic bullet, where would you invest? I mean, and then you're also seeing a far greater number of psychiatric disorders, things like that, dealing with society, right? So what would you look at in theory? What's an ideal place to look at where there might, if there was another intervention that was needed by government, such as there was with COVID, where would that be applied today, right? Because people aren't getting healthier. Cost is just going to go through the roof.
Right.
So if you had to have an intervention, what would that be?
So, by the way, Javier, your list was phenomenal.
Yeah,
I
it was
agree.
inclusive.
I'm a founder of an emerging vaccine company, and it's very clear that the world has changed a bit, and a infectious disease that it used to be in what's considered a remote area can now spread much more quickly. And infectious diseases has always had this terrible cycle of SARS happens and a lot of money is spent. I think there's been some changes, and I think there's going to be a trend of data related of strengthening public health agencies. We've practically totally dismantled a lot of our capabilities in this country, and I think that will change. A lot of that's going to be sort of data driven. So I think that's important. Marty, I think, and I agree, by the way, diagnostics as well. After Cytic, I started a company called Exact Sciences, where we came up with an alternative to colonoscopy. And there are so many opportunities still in major primary screening tests that are still done poorly. And I would say, so Cytic, one of my companies, Cytic, was very innovative, is 90% of all pap smears are done with our instrument. Well, that should be replaced with innovation. There are better ways to do it. So those are opportunities. Marty, you mentioned mental health. I think we're going to see, we are already seeing increased focus, increased spending. If you look at the percentages spent at NIH and NSF, it is a greater amount. It's been slow, but you have to, since it takes a long time to solve problems, you have to anticipate where things are going to be in several years. And I think it's been kind of an underinvested area in mental health. And a lot of that, by the way, can be solved with less expensive tools like digital health tools. So I think that's a really interesting area.
Right. I mean, so I just want to paint this picture one way, which is that on one side we're talking about regulatory, but on the other side, after you have your diagnostic, you've got bureaucratic, and it's very difficult if you're not at a certain education level to kind of navigate that bureaucracy. It's often confusing. Insurance costs are skyrocketing. I mean, all costs are going through the roof.
Well, there's also privacy issues, Marty. Think about the compelling privacy issue,
right?
The underwriting issue of health privacy. Who has the right to find out that? And that's another huge thing that kind of is the elephant on the table. I don't know if we've talked about.
So for chronic conditions, I'm simplistic probably, but a large part of the issue is behavior. And people that are maybe having mental issues, but they start drinking, not exercising, eating too much, whatever. So behavior change is one of the magic bullets for the chronic conditions. How can you change behavior? There are not many things, but digital health actually is one that starts to be proven. I wish it was better in mental health. It works really well in diabetes. It works pretty well in cardiovascular. And it's a closed loop. You measure something for the patient, you show them, hey, if you do this, you are better. If you do that, you are worse. And people that get into this game, it's actually some are gamified, improve their behavior and improve their health.
Well, this is a very important set of diseases and one that we certainly hope we'll make progress on. What has held these diseases back is that the connection between a biological problem and a clinical symptom is more tenuous in the mental health area and the psychiatry area than almost anywhere else in medicine. And so as that gets solved, I think we'll really see some progress.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Well, I appreciate everyone speaking up and sharing their thoughts and opinions and insights. It was a great meeting, and Marty, we'll give it back to you.